Hi everyone, I'm Gillespie, tax partner for KPMG here in Hamilton. And with me today is Ruth Todd, our regional managing partner for our Regions East territory. We are here today to discuss the 2019 KPMG CEO Outlook report. The 2019 report surveyed 1,300 CEOs, 75 of which were from Canada, the rest were global. And the purpose of the survey is to get the views of CEOs on their highest priorities, opportunities, daunting challenges that their businesses face. The report dives into opportunities and threats with regards to innovation, cybersecurity, the workforce, agility, and strategic alliances. Now, I will say there are quite a few statistics in the report, so strap on your seatbelt as we go through quite a few numbers. Ruth, why don't we start with the topic of cybersecurity? This is a big issue that many organizations are facing. We are hearing about more and more attacks daily in the news. So Ruth, how ready are the Canadian CEOs for cyber attacks?
Okay, Aaron, well, firstly, before we talk about readiness, let's talk about it's when, not if. So 54% of our Canadian CEOs believe an attack will happen in the near future, and they see that as a significant risk. Now that's up from only 7% 1 year ago, so that's a massive jump in a 1 year time frame. So 7% to 54% in the current year. That said, they're actually less prepared for an attack. So despite all of that anxiety, only 59% of our Canadian companies are actually prepared for a cyber attack. And that's down from their global counterparts who come in at around 68%. So while we say all of that, Canadian companies also believe that they're lagging in cyber awareness. So 64% view cyber awareness as a strategic function. So 2/3 roughly believe that is a strategic function. So interesting that it's when, not if, but we're still lagging in awareness and we're really not ready. So the firms that can actually build a workforce that has a culture that will help them defend their borders, the ones that are successful at doing that, as well as the ones that continue to scan the market, keep their defenses up, and defend their digital borders, are the ones that are going to be successful in this space in the years to come. So interesting year ahead, I think, to see where this goes given that leap over the last year.
Right. It seems like maybe it's a little bit of that, we're Canada, we're a little bit smaller, we've got this giant neighbor to the south, and maybe we're not on the radar, but it seems like we're starting to recognize, no, Canada is on that global radar for cyber attacks.
For sure it is.
Yeah. Okay, Ruth, let's talk about the I word, innovation. Ruth, what's on the minds of Canadian CEOs when it comes to innovation and digital disruption?
So first of all, as you know, Aaron, in the report, they talked a little bit about how do you define innovation. So most companies define that differently than one another in the space. And so that's really important and a great discussion in the report itself. But we have suddenly, CEOs are less eager to innovate. So a year ago, we had 96%, let's just say all, Canadian companies were very eager to innovate. And that number is down to only 69% in the current year. So that's interesting, I think, in a 1 year time frame that has changed on CEOs' minds. But with that said, 73%, let's say 3/4 of our Canadian companies are bolder than their peers. So they actually are confident in their ability to be able to disrupt in their marketplace. So you and I are challenged a little, I think, with the math on that. 73% are disruptors. Who's on the other side of that? So it's interesting. And that's actually higher than their global CEOs that come in at around 69%. So slightly higher. And is it caution or complacency? Because while 75% of Canadian CEOs want to empower their workforce culture to innovate without fear of failure, they're less reluctant to do so than their global counterparts. So interesting, we'll see how that happens. 76% of Canadian CEOs agree that they need to improve their innovation processes, and it's all about execution, right? So all about execution. That's where the game is going to be won, is around execution, around innovation. So most Canadian CEOs are confident in their ability to be able to disrupt, and many are intent on being able to be disruptors, as opposed to being the disrupted. So I think the ones that are going to win here are the ones who actually make time and space for their teams to be able to innovate. So Aaron, we see this all the time, right? It takes time to get above your business to be able to think about innovation and to be able to give your teams the time to do that and the skills and the investments that they need to be able to execute. So the ones that are looking at the value around investing in automation, big data, artificial intelligence, and so on, are the ones that are going to win in the innovation game. So again, interesting year ahead to see where that goes for sure.
Yeah, this section of the report, my suspicion is that it was easy maybe a year or two ago to say, yeah, I want to be an innovator. You know, it was a buzzword, everybody talked about innovation. Now I think you're right, it's about execution. So I think we're seeing the numbers drop a little bit only because they're realizing, okay, now we have to execute on that.
Absolutely.
And that, as you said, that's going to be, where the rubber hits the road. Okay, you also, Ruth, talked about the labor force in innovation. So that's a nice segue into the next part of the report, which talked about a term called hybrid workforce.
Mm-hmm.
What is the CEO's perception on sourcing talent in what is a really highly competitive market right now in an increasing digital workplace?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and Aaron, you and I see this every day with the clients that we work with, but also in our own business, we see that there is a talent crunch for sure, and our Canadian CEOs are feeling that talent crunch. 63% of our Canadian CEOs say that their ability to grow is going to be negatively impacted by their inability to find the right talent. And so that's a massive number. Again, close to 2/3 of companies are impacted by this talent crunch. And so that's really, really big. One thing that's really interesting in the report is that only 44% of our Canadian CEOs, so less than half of our Canadian CEOs, are looking internally at their own workforce and are thinking about upskilling and investing in their teams to get the talent that they need. So that's a really big difference from their global counterparts, which is coming in at around 81%. So global companies are looking internally, people they know, people they can invest in and upskill with, as opposed to thinking about going outside of the company to get the talent that they need. I don't know, maybe we'll see that change in the 12 months ahead, but that's...
Feels like maybe we're lagging a little bit there then, maybe in that recognition that
perhaps,
in such a competitive marketplace, that's what you need to be doing, is looking more internally.
Yeah, rethinking how you've got people and what you're asking people to do. So we'll see where that goes in the year ahead, but I find that an interesting statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly CEOs are having a difficult time to find the right talent, and when you tag that on to our earlier conversation around innovation, certainly that's an interesting combination. So building a future-ready workforce is definitely easier said than done. And that's being impacted by aging workforces, skills mismatch, and increased competition for labor. Let's face it, there's lots of opportunities out there for good people, and we see that every day. So it's going to be difficult to find the talent that we need. So the companies that can win in this space are the ones that surround themselves with a future-ready team, and that will mean looking internally, thinking about how to upskill, how to build talent, how to build pipelines to our universities that have excellent talent coming out of their doors every day, probably building those relationships earlier, sooner, deeper. And let's face it, it's going to be really important to build your brand so that talent wants to come and work for you. So while we talk about that, I find this interesting too on the tail of our innovation conversation. 79% of our Canadian CEOs, 79%, believe that all of the automation and innovation that's coming at us in the world today is actually going to create more jobs. So we actually used to talk about this in terms of being able to alleviate this talent crunch that we're feeling, but that's not the case. We're actually going to need more jobs, because while we see innovation and automation and all of those things happening in the workforces, it's meaning that humans are playing a different role in the work that's getting done. And we haven't been able to remove that human element to the warehouse floor, the boardroom, the offices, customer service, you name it. That human element is really, really important. And so individuals that take ownership of an organization's vision, that build deep and genuine connections to both their communities, their partners, and their customers, are going to be able to win in this space. And that's going to drive innovation in ways that machines can't replicate. So interesting, again, to see how that unfolds.
That makes sense to me, and that gives me some comfort that I'm going to have a job in 15 or 20 years from now too, so that's good.
For sure.
Okay. All right.
It is good in a people business that we're in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. The Outlook report discusses strategic alliances due to economic and political uncertainties. Can you elaborate on the role of strategic alliances, Ruth?
Absolutely. So this is interesting, right? Because think about innovation, think about a talent shortfall and all of the things happening in the world around us. So economic and political uncertainties have actually driven one third of our Canadian companies to put this as their top growth strategic goal. So 1/3 of them are pursuing strategic alliances to actually build out their growth strategy. I think that's a massive number, and that's up from 14% a year ago. So again, pretty big jump, I think, in a 12-month time period. And so we used to do this through mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, organic growth. And I think all of those things take much longer. And so CEOs are looking to strategic alliances to be able to achieve their growth goals. The desire for this is actually outweighing the pursuit of growth organically. And that's an interesting statistic, I think, for us to remember. But with that, CEOs are being very selective. So it's all about quality, not quantity. And that's even down from globally. Globally, CEOs are saying at 71%, it's really important that they get the quality of the strategic alliance as opposed to lots of strategic alliances. So again, that new partnership forging is really important. And I guess, again, 60% of them admit that they have to reconsider those because it's really hard to find a strategic alliance that aligns with your culture, your vision, your goals, and so on. And so while we, again, say that they're pursuing that and they want really great quality, that's easier said than done. So a number of these things are going to be challenges for the year ahead for our CEOs to be able to accomplish and execute on. The ones that can find those strategic alliances are going to win in the marketplace.
Right. To me, that speaks to the company's ability to be agile. And I do think it's interesting that that's risen up to their number one growth strategy, where we typically think about organic growth or mergers and acquisitions. These alliances are actually rising to the top. I find that very interesting, Ruth.
For sure.
Thank you, Ruth, for the snapshot of the report. It's been really interesting. If anyone wants to learn more, you can certainly Google KPMG 2019 Canadian CEO Outlook. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Aaron.